didn't see many people of color that were there as financial advisors. In fact, there was just one.
And so often that financial literacy is relegated to moving from poverty to something. And certainly still now, I don't believe there's enough focus on what happens when you do have disposable income.
Our society has a fundamental flaw when it comes to financial education, point blank. When you think about athletes and entertainers, and more on the sports side, their career spans are very short. Now my company does a lot of work in the sports and entertainment space, and you can't have generational wealth to transfer if there is no wealth that is there. My husband plays in the NFL. We need to have a conversation. And I can remember them coming into my office. He sat down in his chair, his arms were crossed, and when I had my initial interviews with individuals, I would take out a legal pad and I would ask a series of questions. His response was, "You need to ask my agent."
Wow.
And so we got about 15 questions in, and I said, with all due respect.
Good evening. My name is Chrissy Thornton. I am the president and CEO of Associated Black Charities. We are so very excited to welcome all of you this evening to the Diane Bell McCoy Equity First webinar series. And I am so very, very happy and blessed to have with us this evening Mr. Drew Hawkins. The Equity First webinar series is really meant to highlight Black excellence, Black progress, and Black success, and also to shine a light on Black professionals who have been purposeful in keeping equity in the forefront of their journeys. And so, Drew, welcome to Associated Black Charities.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
We're so glad to have you here and to learn a little bit more about your story and journey today, to learn all of the wonderful things you've navigated and some of the challenges, in hopes that we can be a beacon of light to our community. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. Well, we'll get started if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and a little bit about your upbringing.
So I am a proud Baltimore native, grew up in Baltimore County in the Catonsville area. Went to school here, Mount St. Joe High School, and then went to University of Delaware College. And I had an opportunity to come back to this space after my experience at the University of Delaware. As a child, I loved sports. I grew up in the church, and my family was pretty active in the community and a variety of things that they had an opportunity to do. And so, I was a finance major at the University of Delaware. During my junior year, I stumbled into the career planning placement office, and Deborah Wales, who I owe so much of my success to, said, "You should go have an opportunity and consider an internship." And so I went to this company called Dean Witter back in the day, and I had an interview. They said, "Great, we're going to bring you in as an intern." And my internship started within about a week after walking in to the door there. And it was interesting for me because I've always been one that wanted to have an opportunity to make money and experience different things. The first job that I had in life, I worked as a dockhand for a gentleman by the name of Ken Wilson.
Okay.
And Ken Wilson was a pioneer in Baltimore. He started out in sales in the media space, and then he was kind of right place, right time on his boat one day, connected with former Governor Schaefer, and had an opportunity to open up the Inner Harbor Marina in Baltimore, which is where all the boaters came. And for me, being able to do that job, it did a lot of things for me. It gave me serious work ethic. It provided me an opportunity to look up to an individual that I had a great degree of respect for in Mr. Wilson, in terms of instituting work ethic and all the things that he did to be as professional as he was and be successful that he was. He was successful in the work that he did, but he was also a pioneer and leader in the community with a lot of the organizations that he was involved in. And so that really impacted me in a variety of different ways. And, working there was one part, but it also provided me a little bit of entrepreneurship, because I opened a boat cleaning business on the side while I was working for him. And so, that was my little side hustle. During the summer, my first couple of years of college, came back, had individuals that worked with me, and we cleaned boats as, our summer job and what we did there. And so it the experience with him just did a lot for me in terms of getting me started, but it also exposed me to a lot of the other successful professional people in Baltimore, African American leaders like Osborne Payne and others that kept their boats at the marina. But it also provided an opportunity for me to interact with so many other people, and things around service, things around being on time, things around being super respectful, and thinking outside of the box were some of these key pieces that I think really helped me get a foothold for what I was then going to do ultimately from a career standpoint.
So it sounds like you had some good mentors.
I did. Very fortunate.
A formative part of your life. You also mentioned Dean Witter, and I can't help but to I was like, wait a minute, Dean Witter internship, Pursuit of Happiness.
Yes, yes. He started out in that
right?
same firm as well.
Yes. So I also see that you were the first Black managing director in wealth management at Morgan Stanley. And that had, firsts are a thing, right? Like you feel the pride of that, but first, certainly not last. What did that moment mean to you, or what does that accomplishment mean to you?
It was very special. It was special in the fact of having an opportunity to do that because, Morgan Stanley, one of the largest financial institutions in the world now, and at that time, the firm basically is broken down into three segments: institutional management, wealth management, and investment management. And the wealth management division, had about 30,000 plus employees. And so, the title of managing director at a big Wall Street firm is kind of when you've arrived. And I was very grateful, but also considering the timing of this, that should have happened years
much
before
earlier.
It
Wow.
took place within a division such as that. But I was excited. My experience there provided me the ability to do a lot of different things, because I started out unpaid intern. That turned into being invited to come on board and go into their financial advisor training program when I graduated. And, when I walked in as an intern, there were two things that bothered me. I didn't see Black folks in there meeting with financial advisors to talk about investing, and I didn't see many people of color that were there as financial advisors. In fact, there was just one, and there's a story that maybe we get to about that later on. And so I said, if I ever had an opportunity to come in and be a part of this organization, there are two things that I would want to have an opportunity to do. Change that equation in terms of being able to educate and get more people of color to understand how the investment game worked and was played, and being able to do more from an investment standpoint, because my parents were both educated, but I was the first financial advisor that they, quite frankly, had ever thought of and dealt with. And the second piece was, at some point, if I came and worked there and had an opportunity to change the game regarding the number of people of color that were in the investment industry, would want to have an opportunity to do that. And so those two things really played a lot as it related to two components of things that I focused on, as my career transitioned over the course of my 28 years of being there.
Before we move on to what you're currently involved in, I'd love to stick on this financial literacy piece a little bit and investment. ABC does financial literacy education, as do a number of other organizations. And so often that financial literacy is relegated to moving from poverty to something. And certainly still now, I don't believe there's enough focus on what happens when you do have disposable income, and how do you feel comfortable and included in investment, in knowing about how to put your finances in things that compound, building residual income. So let's talk a little bit about your value system around those things in the Black community.
So they're critical, and I want to applaud you and I want to applaud ABC for the role and functionality that you all have there. You all have had some really great programs. You get big turnouts. I've seen the curriculum, and it's really good stuff. And people that come and attend your programs leave really having walked away with getting some valuable information that's critical for them. Our society has a fundamental flaw when it comes to financial education, point blank. This is something that should be taught when kids are in elementary school and continuing to be a part of their process as they go through the different grades and then through the collegiate level as well. When you think about money, money can be a very intimidating thing to talk about when you've not had a level of comfort and exposure to it. But when you put it in bite-sized pieces, when you make it easy to understand, and when you put it in day-to-day terms that people can connect to, it makes a lot of sense in terms of being able to utilize it and incorporate it into a regular day part of your life. And, one of the challenges I think that our race has, been exposed to is the fact that we haven't had the experience that others have had growing up as children. That needs to change. And having an opportunity now to educate our children in simple ways, showing the distinction of, making a sacrifice and not buying this, but investing this, and what that can look like and appeal to down the long run will make all the difference in the world. And it's so much of, again, starting the process soon and putting it in bite-sized pieces. There are a lot of myths around investing. People think you've got to have large sums of money, or that you put it in and you're going to lose it overnight. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed in my early years as a financial advisor, was having seminars on Saturdays in the churches, understanding that, we just had to make this a regular conversation and make it understandable for people to understand about compounding interest and taking money and putting even small amounts of money away on a regular basis, and how that could grow and be impactful for them over a period of time. And so it's an area that I'm excited about when we think about retiring. And, a lot of times you look at that paycheck and like, no, I can't afford to take any more out and allocate to a 401k plan. It doesn't take long before we get to those ages where we begin to think about that. And again, small amounts or larger amounts that are invested in a consistent basis, diversified into a portfolio, investing in a variety of different things over a period of time, will have a significant impact on the things that we can do. And, we like to throw this term around generational wealth transfer.
Yes.
And now my company does a lot of work in the sports and entertainment space, and you can't have generational wealth to transfer if there is no wealth that is there to transfer.
To begin with.
Yes.
Oh, it's such a fun. First of all, I am just feeding off of your passion. I saw your eyes light up talking about this, and I can tell that you get very excited about the empowerment that this conversation can have in our community. But you mentioned sports and entertainment,
yes.
So I'd love to talk about how you got from financial planning and the investment world into starting EduCore Sports and Entertainment, and tell us all about it.
So it goes back to my days as a financial advisor. I would always hear and read about some of the different horror stories relating to players and people in entertainment. And I attended a fundraising event in Baltimore a long time ago, and there was an individual there that said, my husband plays in the NFL, we need to have a conversation. And I can remember them coming into my office, and literally he sat down in his chair, his arms were crossed, and when I had my initial interviews with individuals, I would take out a legal pad and I would ask a series of questions. And every single question that I asked this individual, his response was, you need to ask my agent.
Wow.
And so we got about 15 questions in, and I said, with all due respect, we're going to stop our conversation now. And I said, candidly, when your career is done, more than likely you're not going to have a need for an agent. You should be embarrassed that you can't answer a majority of the other questions that we're talking about, because this is your money. This is what you go out there and you put your
also how we
heart
get
and
cheated
soul on the line
so
for every day.
Yeah.
And so he sat up, conversation took a different toll. He ended up becoming a great client of mine and referred other players to me. And even though I transferred out of being an advisor, it just continued to stick in my claw of the fact that there have been billions and billions of dollars that have gone through the hands in our society and in our communities of entertainers and athletes that have been taken advantage of and haven't had the education to do the things that they've needed to do. And so, my last 5 years at Morgan Stanley, I launched and ran their global sports and entertainment division, which was a division that was the first of its kind for any firm on Wall Street. We started with an idea and concept, and 5 years later, the division had amassed a little over $55 billion in assets for the clients that our advisors were working with. And then after I left Morgan Stanley, I really wanted to have an opportunity to build on some of the work that was done. Because the one thing that resonated in every single one of these situations was the fact that so much of it was lack of understanding and lack of education around the topic. And so while that was part of what I did in the old division, EduCore was a company that started, and EduCore is made up of 3 words: educating you and core. That's how we came up with the idea. And so education is the core of everything we do within our organization. We're not financial advisors. We're not financial planners. We don't sell financial products. Our whole focus is to educate, equip, and empower individuals in entertainment and sports to have a better understanding around their business, financial, and lifestyle affairs. Because when you think of sports and entertainers, they're some of the most talented, dedicated, focused, disciplined people in the world at their craft. And they've spent a lot of time and attention practicing and doing things to get to that professional level. But no different than a physician that goes through medical school and all the things that they need to do there. No different than an attorney that goes through undergrad, law school, and comes out and practices. Attorneys and physicians make a lot of the same mistakes that athletes and entertainers do. But in their situations, they're typically going to have another 30 or 40 years to work in their job and make money
start to build it back up.
Build that back up. When you think about athletes and entertainers, and more on the sports side, their career spans are very short. We joke, but the average NFL player's time in the NFL is 2.6 years.
Wow.
2.6 years, so NFL is National Football League, but it also stands for not for long when you think about their time in that sport. And it is so imperative that these individuals get this information as early as they can to try to utilize it and, provide them with the things and resources that they're going to need to hang on to it. Because when you think about it, they're getting money at one of the most inopportune times in their life in terms of their experience level and their discipline level to make these decisions. And so, we try to provide as much information with them early on so that they can have an understanding around what they need to do and how they need to deal with it.
So here you were building a new market, and a very exciting one at that. How did you build it? How did you recruit your clientele, and what challenges did you face doing so?
So it's still challenging. It's still being built because, when we think about the leagues and when we think about, a lot of these issues, they've been going on for a long period of time. And, like it or not, the level of education and time that's provided in a lot of these situations is nowhere near what it should be. And so in our situation, we've had to go out and basically, we have a dual sales process. We have to sell the teams why this is important for them to take the time and take the resources to have their players sit and be a part of special programs. Because again, not to call out any names, but a lot of times these players are exposed to about an hour's worth of financial education training a year, in 1 year. And so when you think about that, how much is someone going to understand and retain and absorb when you're only exposed to it for that, period of time? And so, it's been able to resonate and utilize relationships that, were developed in my previous experience. People get excited about the topic because they realize, wow, it's a no-brainer, that needs to be done. And so tapping into some of those old relationships, people that I've had an opportunity to meet along the way, I've done a lot of networking and, just putting in the time and going out and, building this thing up from scratch.
So let's talk a little bit about the Baltimore of it all, the Black community of it all. It sounds like you were positioned for opportunity. You were able to go to college, and then you had the opportunity to interface with some successful people who poured into you. Still Black.
Yes.
How does race show up in your journey? How has race, if it has, created any challenges for you along the way?
So race was very real. So when you think about, my coming into the investment industry, I graduated from college. I was 21 years old, and I graduated on a Sunday, and that Monday I started into the financial education training program. And, let's think about Wall Street back then, and Wall Street to a degree to this day. You didn't see a lot of folks that looked like myself in those roles. It was an industry that was dominated by older white men. And so...
Is it still?
Very much
ways?
so,
Okay.
yes. And so, but we've got some very, very successful people that are out there doing some amazing, incredible things now, but again, the majority in that category. And so early on for me, I don't come from a wealthy family, didn't have these relationships where, a lot of folks can come right out and get plugged into the country club network, or my mom and dad are in this or in that. I didn't have those opportunities. And so it was starting from scratch. Mm-hmm. And back in the day, before we had cell phones, before we had the do not call list, you cold called. Mm-hmm. And you basically dialed for dollars. And you got on the phone, you would try to do some homework. You would have specific things that you typically would call people about that you were trying to pitch them on. And so, hello, Mrs. Jones, this is Drew Hawkins calling from so-and-so. We've got this great municipal bond offering. Would love to be able to come out and, provide you a little bit more information about it. And so when you made these phone calls, and sometimes, the individual would say, yep, sounds good. Let's go ahead and get it done. Things really don't happen to that degree anymore. But a lot of times you were calling to get the appointment to go out and sit and have the conversation. Mm. And I can remember, guess who's coming to dinner? You just said it. I was little Sidney Poitier back then. And you would get to the door and in my briefcase and, I'm ready to roll. And hi, you are, yes. And so, that was a piece that you had to deal with. Mm-hmm. But you had to put in your mind that this was a game that was all about green. And mm-hmm. so, while you had some of those added challenges to deal with, you had to move those roadblocks out of your head and plow forward. And having an opportunity to move out of being a financial advisor and then going to management and then senior management, that just got elevated to another level at that point, because now you're sitting in meetings and now you're leading people of different colors and backgrounds. And as the branch manager or as the regional director, you now were going out and you're meeting with some of the wealthiest people in the world with that individual or on their behalf. And so again, you put these things to the side and you recognize that you were talented, you were smart, you should be where you are, and you plowed forward to the best that you could to deal with that. But it was also challenging back then because I remember a situation where when I first started out, there was an African-American manager, and this individual would not give me the time of the day. Wouldn't give me the time of the day. And it's just interesting how things developed. I came in, went through the training program, went through, my years as a financial advisor, and he then lost his management role, became an advisor, and now I was the regional director overseeing the region that he was working in, and he reached out.
Tables turned.
Yeah, the tables turned.
Yeah.
So a lot of challenges there, and it was tough also because my days and situations were different than my white counterparts or others that, were going through the business. They weren't dealing with some of the issues that I had to deal with. And it was very tough because there wasn't someone that I could reach out to talk to mm-hmm. about those things. You can talk about, okay, the challenges with the market and this and that and the other with everybody. But again, as you think about your network and your background, that was very tough. And so, going through the business and having an opportunity to be there, it afforded me the ability now, once I got a bully pit and reached a level of seniority, to start doing other things within the organization in terms of creating this level of understanding and awareness as to why we don't have the representation that we could and should, thinking about resources that could be put in place to help support that, but also beginning to change people's minds about, what the clientele looked like.
Yes, and what it could look like.
What it could look like, okay?
Yeah.
And, you don't just, I'm not saying you have to have a certain advisor to go after a certain marketplace, but it certainly helps. And, a lot of these marketplaces were being ignored because of, just a lack of ignorance or a significant amount of ignorance, or the fact that, we're making a lot of money, we're very profitable, why worry about that? And now the level of worrying about that, realizing that folks are emerging, folks are becoming a lot more competent and having an opportunity to invest and want to do that, and raising that level of attention for the organization to address this issue in a variety of different ways.
Would you say you've had to work twice as hard?
Yes.
You didn't hesitate.
Definitely, no.
Didn't hesitate.
My hours were a lot longer, and I was okay with that because of the work ethic that I had been instilled in me prior to getting to that particular point and position. But again, when you think about things back in the day, in terms of building this clientele up, you typically would have to make 100 cold calls to get 10 appointments. And out of those 10 appointments, you were lucky to get 2 of those situations to close. And so think about making 100 cold calls and what that number looks like. And so, you would get in, and I like to meet people face to face. And so, my numbers were pretty aggressive in terms of the calls that I made. But then when you think about it, living in Maryland and on the East Coast, your day wasn't done at 6 o'clock, because guess what? You could call different time zones. So we could reach out into Central, and you could still be at work at 9, 10 o'clock at night, cold calling people in California. And
so you looked for the opportunities to win.
Definitely.
I love
Definitely.
hearing about your drive and all of those
and
things.
being different, because you had to try to come up with different ways, to how you positioned yourself to be able to add more value and to have an opportunity for success.
So now you're here, successful, right? And maybe successful in an industry that our community doesn't have great understanding of. How have you told your story in your own community, in your own family? How have you made it make sense as to how you've become the Drew Hawkins of today, and a non-traditional feel for someone that looks like you?
So still working on the, continuing to build the success, but just having real simple, down-to-earth conversations about, how things work and how it operates. When you talk about investments and putting it in day-to-day terms for them to have a level of understanding around it. Still get calls from friends and family. Hey, this is what I'm considering. This is what I'm thinking about. What should I do? And just being able to take the time to have those discussions and conversations about some of the basic things that are needed from an investment standpoint, putting things away as it relates to that, to being able to get that done. The other thing is I take a lot of pride in being able to provide mentorship. And, I had people that were around me that, saw something in me that reached back, and I've made myself annoying enough because I want to spend time with you and learn and shadow and do some of the things, that are needed there. And so, there are very few times that I'll turn a phone call down from an individual that reaches out, wants to mentor, and some of the work that I've had, the ability to have an opportunity to do with some of the other organizations that I've worked with. Going back in the day, there was an organization that was started in Baltimore called Black Professional Men.
Yes.
And, that organization, there were 3 initial co-founders, myself, Scott Phillips, Edwin Avent.
Yeah.
And, we really prided ourselves, number one, on being a group that was able to get young brothers in the professional world in a variety of different ways to get together, network, and look at some of the things that we wanted to do. But really where we hang our hat was in our mentor program, because we started a mentor program that went into some of the inner city schools where you had young African American boys that didn't have a father or an uncle or a positive role model in their lives. And we adopted some of these schools, and these individuals became really close with us. And as much as we were able to have some positive impacts on their lives, it really changed our lives in a lot of different ways in terms of being able to give back and provide help and support and leadership for some of the folks that we work with.
We're going to talk about a little bit more of your community work, but I'd love to stay here on the young people because I think we know they are our future. We should be raising emerging leaders and all those kinds of things. Someone once told me that you build your financial future for your 80s when you're in your 20s. Mm-hmm. And so how important is it for us to really focus on this upcoming generation, making sure they have the tools and the opportunity, and I think also the desire to have financial fitness?
I think it's critical, and I like that term, financial fitness. Again, it is being able to show the opportunity and the impacts that investing, sacrificing can have over a sustained period of time. And, it's interesting, we're sitting here, we had the NFL draft last night, a lot of thoughts around that, but you see, the gold jewelry and the diamonds and all the bling, and, we're actually working on a piece today, but I look at some of those pieces of jewelry that were worn last night, that were $40,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Yeah.
Okay. And what the impact of them not having that and having that money sitting in a bank and what that would be worth, not in the bank, but in an investment account, what that would be worth when they reach the age of retirement.
Yeah.
And so, as we think of just so many other individuals, it's getting the information. A lot of times we don't want to think about what's going to happen when we're 59 and a half because, geez, I've got a lot of time in order to be able to get to that point. And I'm going to make money and I'll wait until I'm at a certain income level and then I can start putting more money away at that particular time. But then there's always something else that comes up.
Yeah.
You've got this added expense. You get married, you buy a house,
medical
you have
things,
children, you have medical things. And so, it's never this perfect time where you're going to have this huge supplement for most individuals to be able to, drop this huge lump sum in and have the capability to do that. So understanding how impactful it is. And, there's a term that we use a lot, and I was having a conversation with someone the other night, timing the market is a big difference than time in the market. And time in the market is what that game-changing piece looks like. Being able to take money out of the paycheck, have it allocated to that 401k account or whatever type of investment program you may have available, or looking at ways that you are taking money on a regular basis and having an opportunity to invest it. And the sooner you can start, the better off it is. I had really good conversation with NFL player the other night, really bright guy, young guy, and he was like, well, I can put money in this 401k thing and kind of not sure how that works. Does that make sense? And explaining to him the fact that you start maxing out in this now, you're 23 years old, you're really not going to need to touch that money until you're 59 and a half. And so let's just do a quick little example on the back of a napkin in terms of what you can put in at a modest rate of return, what that's going to look like at that point. And the other cool thing about it is there are no taxes that are taken out of that. It's going to grow at a tax-deferred basis until you have to go into it. And so I think more younger folks just need to start thinking about it in that particular capacity. Start now, small amounts that are put in on a consistent basis over a period of time, they add up. And as your income grows, doing more things, those numbers are going to increase in terms of what you can, have the ability to put away. And, having a budget and incorporating that into your budgeting piece is going to make a significant impact for folks.
I think a lot of times it comes down to mindset in our community. And I lose sleep actually thinking about how we can begin to shift mindset. It seems judgmental when we say, don't have the necklace, or when I mentor and I talk about, some of the brand names that we're so connected to and how you can do a little bit of both, right? But success sometimes looks different in communities who feel like they haven't had access to it. And so, how important it is for us to really just begin to break down the mindsets that keep us away from long-standing generational opportunity. Gosh.
And, and don't get me wrong, jewelry's great. And
you gotta do both.
It could be jewelry, it could be, something else.
Purses.
I want people to reward themselves, purses, car, vacation, what have you. Reward yourself, that's fine. But do it in moderation,
Yeah.
and thinking about, as we think about those on the sports side, you hopefully you're going to have that second and third contract to have an opportunity to get to. But again, thinking about the long-term impacts of what these dollars can have and how that will have an opportunity to work is one of the things that we really try to instill.
And I know growing up, at least in my generation, we were always taught that you should do better than the generation before you, right? Like, and they made sure they paved the way for us. They gave us the tools. They sacrificed so that we could have more than they had. And, I just wonder where that lands in our community.
It's significant, and I look at lessons that I got from my parents, and I can still hear my father in my head today. My father was very conservative, did not like to spend a lot of money, was good with the money that he had, and we were from two different time frames, and he would look at me and some of the things that I did, even being in the business, and believe me, I've made my share of financial mistakes along the way as well. But you always want to think about the things that they pass down, and being able to utilize those, but also being able to reward yourself and do some things along the way as you go through that process as well. And I think there was a lot more on the just savings and putting away, and quite candidly, investment vehicles that they utilized that don't exist now, but being able to take some of those principles and be able to apply those in a variety of different ways. And the other thing, that I'd say when you talk about, thinking about people that came before us and our ancestors, there's a big mental component that comes into play when you think about money and how people operate and the things that they do with that. And there's some big distinctions as well from a societal standpoint in terms of that's handled and dealt with. One of the things that we provide within our organization is we, have programs around how the mental health piece connects with the financial piece, and this whole piece called financial wellness. And one of the things that we provide, and one of our programs that we offer for our players, and now we do it for some folks that are non-players, is we have them go through a financial awareness test. And we ask questions about how they would deal with and how they think about certain situations. And not to a T, but it puts folks in some different categories and buckets. And then we have an opportunity to break that information down from their background, and it talks a lot and points to a lot about why people do some of the things that they do when it comes to their finances. And a lot of it has to do with maybe not having access to it when they were coming up.
Conditioning, too.
Wanting to show that I've arrived and I've made it, wanting and feeling like there's an obligation of taking care of other people and doing things in a variety of those different ways. So, it's kind of a two-part process, right? You can teach someone investing and all the things that they need to do as it relates to that, but it's critical prior to that for someone to understand, how do I think about it? What are the things that I do related to it? Because if those habits are not going in the right direction, it doesn't matter what you're doing over here, because you're not getting the money and resources to get to this place in order for that to happen and for that to take place the way that it could and should.
So also, you're very involved in your community.
I am.
You're current board chair at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum, which I have to believe comes from your commitment to preserving Black history, celebrating Black joy, and all of the things. Tell us a little bit about that and how that is part of your leadership model.
So again, coming into the business and not having connections and relations, I was always one that liked to volunteer and do things, but back in the day, that was a way to get out, network, and, get connected in a variety of different ways for things that you were very compassionate about. And, it's one of these things, I guess, that has always been in my DNA. And, my dad died a year ago, and in going through and putting his obituary together, looking at all the things that my father was involved with and where he served. I mean, I'm I'm humbled. I've done some things, but when I look at the resume of things that he did, it was outstanding, and never really recognized kind of that was part of my DNA. And, I think that when you're fortunate and when you're blessed, it's a commitment that you have that you've got to give back and support areas that you think are critical and important for you. And, Wanda Draper, my close friend, got me connected with the Reginald F. Lewis Museum about 7 years ago. I've had an opportunity now to come in and serve the organization in a variety of capacities, as a board member. And this institution is just so critical for our state and for our country, quite candidly, because it has an opportunity to promote and preserve the significance that African Americans had in this state of Maryland and in this country. And there's so many amazing stories to be told, and the impact is so significant as it relates to that. And so when you think about where we are in society, unfortunately now, and how folks are trying to erase the history books and keep real information away from people that happen, to be able to have an institution like that that talks about it, that promotes it, that shows it, but is also a place where we can come have great engaging conversations about a variety of different things. It's really important, the work that gets done there, as well as, in so many other places. And so I take my civic work very importantly, and try to find things that I'm passionate about and really put in the time and effort that I think will be able to help and benefit those that are involved in those places.
So you mentioned the current landscape and some of the challenges we're navigating now. It's a lot.
A lot.
Let's settle on the word equity. Equity first. What does equity look like to you in action? How can we protect it, preserve it? What does it look like in business? What does it look like in community work? Where does it land for you?
I mean, it's critical and it's important. And I think, having an opportunity, obviously, to have that ownership, to have that time that we are all spending and investing in doing the things that are critical and important to ourselves and to our communities. I think at times we might take for granted the impact that we as individuals have in some of these areas. And I think now more than ever, to be able to speak up, to be proactive in your organization, within your community, because the onslaught of what's taking place is not going to change. Folks would like to see us go back in a different direction in terms of where we are now, and that's not going to happen. But it's critical now for individuals to be able to really step up and have that equity stake, and being comfortable stepping out and doing the things that need to be done in these different areas.
Yeah, it's a constant fight, constant advocacy, but it doesn't very much feel new to many of us who have navigated this all along.
Not at all.
Yeah, unfortunate. So if you had the opportunity to look back and talk to little Drew, little 10-year-old Drew or 20-year-old Drew, what now, having navigated and learned some of the things you've learned, what would you say to him?
I mean, so this is going to sound crazy, having been in financial services, but continue to be smarter with your money and some of the things that you do as it relates to that. Continue to be smart about the people that you surround yourselves with, because that's critical. And being a good judge of character is really important as you navigate through this, workspace. I would also, make sure that you continue to not put any boundaries on some of the things that you want to have an opportunity to do, because your mentality and mindset is what often can be restrictive as it relates to that. Having more work-life balance.
That's what people keep talking about. I'm not sure what that is.
Yes.
People talk about that a lot, though.
And I think I've had a cool life. I've been able to do some fun things, but you get caught up, and I know you've got to put the time and effort and energy into obviously your job and all that gets connected with that, but you can't discount the importance of spending quality time with family, with friends, taking vacation, doing the things that you need to do to make sure that you're healthy and you're happy, because you just never know when this great game of life could come to an end. And the more that you do in terms of being able to keep that body fueled and happy and more balanced provides you the capability to show up in your work in these other places in a more impactful manner. And I think a lot of times, very guilty as charged, I 28 years at Morgan Stanley, and maybe I took a week and a half off a year. And I got to the point where, there was a plethora of vacation time, and, there was no big box of money that showed up when I left saying, hey, here's all this that, was unutilized and accumulated. And I really kicked myself, as it related to not doing more of that
for yourself
as I went through that particular period.
So how do you engage in personal and professional growth today? What are the things you tap into to keep getting stronger, being better?
I like to read. I like going to a variety of programs, and I've been fortunate with some of the other organizations that I'm involved with and people that I connect with through my professional career to be able to form relationships with these individuals. And I love being able to go out and just pick somebody's brain on their success. What have you done? How do you do this? What are some of the key things that have been really critical and important for you? And that's one of the big areas of learning that I've had an opportunity to be really connected with. And people in all different capacities, not necessarily the president of an organization, but people that I view that have been successful and are doing things that I feel like I can benefit and learn from in a variety of different ways. And the other big thing now is being with young people. Okay. So, I have this company. We've got our area of expertise around, the financial side of things, but the majority of clients that we serve to a large capacity are in their late teens and 20s, and even getting younger now that we're doing work in the name, image, and likeness stuff. And so I challenge them to challenge us in terms of looking at things and doing them differently, but being able to listen to them and getting their thoughts and perspectives. And coming into this business of what I'm doing now several years ago, thinking you knew a lot, well, now I think I know a little bit, but there's now so much to learn because of how things are done differently with social media and people's attention spans and just the way that you communicate certain things. And so I love being around younger folks that, have a variety of different ideas and can teach me a lot of different things in a lot of different ways.
So I just have two more questions for you. I want to just bring Baltimore into it. So you were born and raised Baltimore adjacent in the county, Baltimore County, and made the intentional choice to come back and work, play, live, pray, and all these things in this region. What does Baltimore mean to you? What are the possibilities that you see? And then specifically for the Black community here in Baltimore?
I love the state of Maryland. When I lived up north, it was a joy to be there, but there were so many things that I just missed about being here. It's my home base. My family's here, my friends here, my best friend lives here. And so, coming back here was a great opportunity for me in a variety of different ways, to get reconnected to that. But when you think about this market, being on the Chesapeake Bay and sports in this area, but also it's interesting when you just think about so many significant leaders that came out of the city of Baltimore. I was away a couple weeks ago visiting with someone, and we just kind of went through a list of all of these different folks that were business pioneers, political pioneers in the sports space, in the music space, and the list goes on. And I know, you go to New York and some of these other areas, the lists are huge, but when you think about our smaller state, it's very significant in terms of what's happened. And to now be in a state where we have first Black governor, where we have a Black mayor, we have other prominent African American politicians and other business leaders leading and running major industries that are here. that's significant and means a lot. When you think about the cultural scene that we have here with the Lewis Museum and the art network that we have here and the music network that we have here, house music, hip hop, so many of these different things, Baltimore is a major player, on that map. And, we've now got and continued to growing, our food scene here, so there's just so many cool things that are a part of living in Baltimore, Maryland, other burbs within this area. And so I love it. There's excitement, there's enthusiasm, there's energy, it's growing. We've got a lot of things that are taking place within this particular area. The cost of living is really good. And, I'm just very bullish on our opportunities in this particular space as we move forward. And I'm really proud to say that I'm from this area, and it was exciting to come back and exciting to be here now.
Okay, and 50 years from now, what do you hope is said about you?
That he cared, that he gave, that he, left this place in a better spot that it was when he came through. That he wanted to impact the lives of other people, and that he utilized his actions and activities in order to be able to do that. I count my blessings. I'm very lucky and appreciative of the things that have been afforded for myself, and I take it very seriously now to be able to provide and, give it back or pay it forward, however you want to look at it, from that particular standpoint. When they walk by my casket or walk by my tombstone, hopefully there'll be some positive things that resonate as it relates to contributions that were made in terms of being someone that really cared about others and tried to make an impact.
Well, thank you so much
Thank you for
being
having
you.
me.
Thank you for being so inspirational. Thank you for walking in your calling and being the wonderful person you are. I would love for you to speak directly to the audience and tell them how to stay connected with you and EduCore and how to get connected to some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so feel free to follow us on Instagram. Follow me personally, W. Drew Hawkins on Instagram, and EduCore, #EduCore on Instagram as well as being able to follow us on LinkedIn. And our website is www.educore.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been the Diane Bell McCoy Equity First webinar series. And for Associated Black Charities, I am Chrissy Thornton. Good night.